Hi there, I'm Ashwin Mohan and you're watching ET Now. Welcome to Amicus Curiae in the post-GST era. Now, it's been a long journey, not only for the government, but also for the show, as we have discussed various aspects of India's most ambitious and bold tax reform in the past several months. Clearly, GST is a path-breaking move. It's definitely going to remove the cascading effect of taxes that has in fact embroiled corporates as well as traders over the past several years. It's also going to contribute to buoyancy in tax collections because there's going to be a wider tax base. More people are going to come under the tax net, so that means there's going to be more compliance. And of course, it's also going to avoid evasion to a great extent because there's online filing. And finally, there's also that expectation, that big expectation that it will provide a bump up of at least 1 to 1.5% as far as GDP growth is concerned. But now that we are in the post-GST era, more importantly, we need to analyze some of the main challenges and grey areas, if any, that exist in the law. And to dissect all those aspects, I have with me a stellar tax panel. I have with me Rohan Shah, I have with me Badri Narayan, and I have with me Amit Sarkar. Gentlemen, to all three of you, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
In the post-GST era. Rohan, let me kickstart with you. I outlined some of the benefits of GST, but there are a few concerns as well. And these are concerns, Rohan, that have been voiced by the government as well. And they feel that there are two big challenges. In fact, this is something that has been voiced specifically by the Chief Economic Advisor, which is rationalization of rates over the next few years, simplification of the entire system, and also bringing more items under the ambit of GST, say for example, petroleum, natural gas, and alcohol. How crucial do you think these two aspects will be, and how do you look at the government strategy? Is it going to be a wait and watch mode like the CA is indicating over here?
You know, the two issues which you outlined, one is rationalization of rates and the second is a more universal GST, which includes and taxes, all products. The situation really is, to me, these are issues which are maybe 2-3 years into the future. The more immediate issue is that, there is huge apprehension of what is going to happen today, tomorrow, and, every day over the next 6 months, because this transition itself is not going to be easy. And as people sort of keep saying, it's going to be quite chaotic. So if I am really concerned right now, I'm really concerned about three things in the short term. One, the GST network itself. We have an assurance from government. We must believe that assurance. But till you are not able to consistently, qualitatively run all the data that you need to run through it,
sure.
You do have an issue. The second is we keep hearing about this preparedness of the small and medium. Don't think of it as, some sort of negligence. Maybe in part it is that, but there is also a reality. Okay. Many parts of the country, you have a situation where people just don't use computers.
Absolutely. Internet penetration is a huge issue.
Wi-Fi, you don't have electricity. So there are some very real problems. So unless all of those guys are part of the chain and completely integrated into GST, you do have a problem. I mean, we talk of anti-profiteering as an issue, and I'm sure it will come up. But think of the factor that ultimately it's a measure to do with the consumer. I control my relationship with the dealer. Thereafter, in the chain of distribution, there may be 3 more tiers going to a retailer. What if one of them slips up?
Sure. So essentially your point being, Rohan, that there are many stakeholders and all of them need to act as a team. Otherwise, this castle of cards will collapse.
Yeah.
Badri, Rohan, I'll have to ask you to hold on to your thoughts over there.
Yeah.
I'll have to quickly move on to Badri because Badri, Rohan made a very important point, which is essentially that the government has now come out with a law. The tax department is, of course, also being trained. Experts like you are advising your clients. But at the end of the day, there are several stakeholders on the ground who also need to be willingly and voluntarily be a part of this so that overall the country benefits. But there's one aspect which is being raised by several quarters of India, and which is that both from a profitability and an administrative standpoint, Badri, many believe that some of the smaller players might cease to exist and only the bigger players might survive and therefore they might grab more market share. Is that a valid fear when you speak to your clients?
I think many people, many traders especially, for example, there's a big difference between the service providers and the manufacturers who have had a history of compliance, history of being able to be in a system and do with that. Because you see in service tax, the exemption was, threshold limit was only 10 lakhs. So you have service providers who are used to this for the last 10 years of complying, filing returns. They have an idea about it. Where I really find is that the trader community typically has been a community which has been kind of at the level below the manufacturer and service providers in providing these services, and has typically been unorganized. If you see, for example, the more than 95 lakh retailers in this country, okay, the numbers are huge, and they are confused at this point of time as to how they are going to comply with this law and go forward from there. According to me, with certain provisions like this section 9(4), which basically says that if I purchase from an unregistered dealer, I have to pay taxes, it's all disincentivizing people from purchasing from a certain class of people.
Sure.
And like Rohan said, the network connectivity, the ability to be able to do business in a particular way, either people will start deciding that I'll go composition scheme, 75 lakhs is what I will live with, I will not go beyond that and try and manage my life through that.
So, Badri, compliance versus survival, do you think some smaller players will actually be forced to shut shop?
I think so. I think more than shut shop, I think there will be a lot of consolidation. So, I think you'll have cooperatives coming together, you'll have retailers coming together in ways which I think this country is a very innovative country. It's a country which comes through lots and lots of issues. So, I always believe, and I have an eternal optimist, that our traders and our businessmen will find solutions. But yes, it's not going to be the same way that we are operating today.
Sure. Badri, now you spoke about innovation, and you know, many corporates and perhaps many traders also, they are spooked by the anti-profiteering norms, because essentially these norms came out barely about 10 days before the GST rolled out. There was no discussion paper, but maybe perhaps the government also was pushed as far as the timing and the deadline is concerned. Badri spoke about innovation. Now, obviously, since it's a new law and since it's taken time to digest, I'm specifically talking about the anti-profiteering norms. I mean, you know, the industry will be looking at innovative ways to wriggle out of the anti-profiteering norms. But the government has said a few reassuring things. One, we'll go only after the big cats, and anti-profiteering will be used only as a last resort. Do you think that is convincing enough for the industry? And that puts the industry's fears at rest? Also, the other aspect, Amit, is that do you think anti-profiteering norms is only, as Mr. Adia pointed out recently, going to be used as a deterrent? It's going to be a big brother, but it's not necessarily going to crack the whip unless you really ask for it.
I equate the government's reassurance on anti-profiteering with the government's assurance when they had brought in imprisonment provisions some years ago in indirect taxes. Everybody was very concerned. There were board of director level conversations happening on this.
Yes.
And did the government meet their promise then? It's the same bureaucrats, it's the same government policy holders. Did they meet their promise then? Okay, there was an apprehension at a very extreme measure where people said that, okay, maybe 100,000 taxpayers potentially may go to jail. Did they go to jail? No. Was it being used judiciously? Yes. Was it only behind repeat offenders? Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Right? So, by an accident of calculation or by something which was a mistake but not deliberate, if you landed up getting triggered by anti-profiteering, possibly you may have an inquiry coming your way. You can sit and have a dialogue with the government official, justify why you have established a particular price point. And of course, the two parties may choose to agree or choose to disagree. If they disagree, one has to back down. And you back down. Now, if after backing down, can this be an appealable order? Of course, yes. Can you justify this? Of course, yes. The problem is not about the environment around anti-profiteering. I don't think anybody has a problem with that. And I'm leaving out the gossip mongers and the rumor mongers here. I'm coming to the meat of the matter. As an accountant, if I'm asked a question by my client, tell me, how do I actually justify that I'm not really, doing something below the table against the policy and intention of the government? I don't have a truthful answer. Just by maintaining a cost sheet, showing the amount of taxes claimed separately and therefore what is the true base value and presenting that as a statement to the government if they come inquiring, is that enough? Or do I have to further go ahead and start proactively negotiating with my suppliers and push their prices down before the government says that you should have done that? Is that enough?
So you're raising certain practical challenges, and I want to give this back to Rohan. Rohan, Amit spoke about certain practical challenges on the ground. How important do you think, Rohan, it is for the government to perhaps provide a more explicit formula for computing the pricing under anti-profiteering norms? Malaysia had a pretty clear-cut example, but in Malaysia's case, it was very strictly imposed. It faced a lot of opposition on the ground. In your opinion, what needs to be the government's big move in terms of reducing the fear around anti-profiteering? Reassuring words are fine, but what needs to be done in terms of clarification from a legal standpoint?
So, two things. Firstly, please understand that our anti-profiteering is triggered not just because you have lower taxes, it's also triggered because you have a better credit environment. And a better credit environment is true of every industry. So in a way, everyone comes under the microscope. Second, one situation is whether or not you will take action. But the reality is that in preparation and as an act of diligence and good governance, every company will have to prepare for this. So that's the reality, right? Every company is on the line. Let's now look at the factor of how many pieces of guidance have we got in terms of how this is to be done. So let's take the three most basic units. Is it only consumer centric, therefore is B2B out? We don't know. Is it an SKU based concept? Is it a division based concept? Is it a location based concept? Is it a company based concept? You will still have people who say, oh, I'm slightly uncertain. Do we have a very good model that we can borrow either from Malaysia or from competition law or from the Safeguards Act? The answer is no. And therefore, the situation is, having set this in motion, you have brought every industry, big and small, under the net. And the least which needs to happen is a very clear set of guidelines in terms of saying, this is what we are looking for, it is at this level, these are the economic indicia we will look for, and your situation is again, where do we need you to exert influence? Is it one chain behind, one link behind in sourcing and one link ahead in distribution? Or do you want me to now engage with the entirety of the chain in sourcing and the entirety of the chain in distribution? So, important unanswered questions, especially when you have some penal provisions which are severe. Yes, the assurance is you will not use them, but my diligence on a day-to-day level to my board, to my stakeholders is already triggered off.
You know, this was something, Badri, that, Rohan and I, we have chatted about this earlier when there was an entire fear in the industry about GAR or General Anti-Avoidance Rules and how the government then came out with specific illustrations. Perhaps that's what needs to be done in the case of the anti-profiteering norms as well, because at the end of the day, the APA is built completely of tax officials. Yeah. There are no representatives from the industry, and perhaps if that constitution is it becomes a little more mixed, there might be a little more comfort factor. What about the sectors, Badri? Now, you, Rohan, as well as Amit, you've been hearing feedback from clients for the past several months. You've been preparing many of them. Which sectors are you feeling the maximum pinch?
According to me, I think the anti-profiteering, I think, will be felt maximum by the service providers. The reason being that, in service providers, you don't go by a cost sheet. You look at what the market is going to be. For example, if you were to tell me as a lawyer that tomorrow you're getting more input tax benefit, or a chartered accountant, I'm getting more input tax benefit, therefore my charge out rate has to drop down by 100 rupees, 200 rupees, it's very difficult to determine that, because that's never the basis for determining what is my output value, okay, because the output value is not dependent like a brick and mortar or for any particular purpose goods in question. So I think service sectors are struggling in terms of being that, and the real estate sector, which is it's a service sector ultimately, being the first target of this, then I think everybody in the services sector is a little jittery as to how this is going to be implemented. That's one area. Other area I think is that the infrastructure space in general, anybody connected to it, they are really concerned. Because once the real estate sector is seen as a sector which is going to be looked at from an anti-profiting point of view, then the cement fellows, the steel fellows, the tile fellows, the works contractors, whole host of people start coming into it because there's a pressure.
Effect. Yeah.
It's got a domino effect on it, and therefore that's another area where I feel there is going to be an impact. Then you have sectors like auto, pharma, which are big sectors, but have had very inefficient tax structures in the past. Okay, so for example, somebody told me in one of the big auto companies that though our after GST rates is in the 40% range, if I today take all my input benefit and I calculate, my value is almost 48-49% in terms of the taxes that I pay. So now how do I reduce my prices? So automobile is another area where the perception is that the rates have gone up, but then people still don't know what is the true impact of the input taxes that it has suffered.
Sure.
So I think that's another area. But really I see services area and this thing. And last but not the least, the trader. So for example, I am always concerned about a person who is in a mall, okay, let's say a Shoppers Stop or somebody like that. He's selling goods which are MRP based. He was a trader. He never got, for example, credit of renting a own property. Today he gets. How does he go ahead and change the MRP on his own? How does he pass that benefit on? Because the companies will say you're not going to drop the benefit, no, you're not going to drop the MRP because that's the price that I fix. So I think traders are going to find it very difficult at the retail level to be able to pass on when the MRP is fixed by somebody else. And how do you control those prices? These are areas I think.
Sure, you have outlined many of them, in fact, and these are crucial sectors as far as the growth of the country is concerned. Amit, it's now time to slip into a short break, but do you quickly want to highlight any other sectors where you can illustrate some practical difficulties? I'm sure you have a laundry list, but a few of them at the top of your mind?
At the end of the day, anti-profiteering is expected to assure the common man that this is ultimately a tax will benefit him. So if I look at an Aam Aadmi philosophy and the traditional economic mindset, it is the basic necessities that I will focus upon: food, shelter, clothing. Badri is already focused enough about shelter. Let's talk about clothing. Textiles was partly covered. Textiles is now fully covered. In fact, there were many big players in the textiles industry who were under the probably foolish assumption that they would not be covered at all at the last minute of the GST.
They got a rude shock,
right? Massive shock,
yeah.
Right? And now here's the problem. 2/3 of your entire retail trade that we talk about are basically your mom and pop textiles, products, ready-made garments, resellers. And they have this cum tax and X tax calculation on margins. This is outside a cost sheet. I may do an arithmetical simulation on the cost sheet and come up with a unit price, but then at the distribution level, at the secondary and tertiary distribution level, I have to reimburse the tax that is paid by the trader. And that is outside a cost sheet calculation. And that is a reimbursement model. So therefore, it's in his books that he may not claim a credit, but it is in my books that I'm actually making a payment, which is outside.
Absolutely.
Now, how is anti-profiteering looking at that? That's theory versus practice, classic dichotomy. And because this is Aam Aadmi, I'm sure the government is going to look at this more closely. So for the first time, trader conversations and trader margin discussions is going to be placed before a panel. And as you rightly pointed out, who in the panel really has the maturity or the astuteness to appreciate these conversations?
Sure, all right. I know. I get what you're saying in terms of some of the concerns that you and Badri have raised. It's time now to slip into a short break, but stay tuned and keep watching Amicus Curiae. On the other side of the short break, we take a look at some of the areas which are vulnerable to litigation and also whether India can take a leaf out of the GST regimes from overseas jurisdictions. Keep watching ET Now. Welcome back to the GST special of Amicus Curiae. And now, Rohan, before we move on to litigation and how we can take a cue from overseas jurisdictions, or as Badri was saying, vice versa, quick thoughts on some of the sectors which you think will find it very difficult to even survive in the post-GST regime.
To me, the one which really stands out is this whole situation with the, gem and jewelry, and specifically the whole diamond cutting polishing. It's a $22 billion industry that we've built from nowhere. It employs about 8 lakh people. Previously, your situation was you brought in rough, and then it went to a series of cutters, and there were traders in between, and that whole process was actually not taxed at all. And as a result, with your value addition and with the 2% markup, you could effectively send the goods out, and you were competitive in exports. Now the situation is that at every stage that it goes for some processing or some trader touches it, you're going to have a levy. Now that levy which is effectively there, if it's a jobber, he will effectively go out and pay 5%. If it's a trade transaction, you will pay whatever you have to pay, 3%, 0.25, etc. The total cost of funding all of this is about 3,500 crores. Government says when you export, I will effectively give you back 90%. But between the time that the rough enters the country and the export occurs, there is 6 months. Now, 80% of the guys can't get bank funding because they are too small. The guys who can get funding will have 10% cost. But the overall cost, which is sunk into this process, is 3,500 crores. 3,500 crores eats away so much from the profitability
that there will be lesser number of rich diamond merchants in the country.
No, there will be no reason for people to stay here. But, forget the empathy or lack of it for rich diamond merchants. 8 lakh guys are employed who look at this as alternate employment against bad agrarian economics.
Absolutely.
That is the heart of the issue.
Point taken. So it's not only sectors, but also, of course, the workforce that's going to be impacted. Badri, we now quickly have to address certain issues in the GST law which are most vulnerable to litigation. I know there are certain issues where there might be interpretation differences between advisors like you and the tax department and the clients. Tell me the top 2 or 3 issues which you see as being it's a no-brainer litigation?
So I see basically classification as the #1 area of litigation, because we have a 5 rate band, and there are products which can fall from one band to other band, and the difference in the rate is very, very high. So you have an 18%, 28%, 10% is a huge amount of tax to pay from your own pocket. So I think classification is going to be one area where there's going to be a lot of litigation.
Sure.
The second area I feel is still going to be on credit. Okay, getting the credit for the reason, for example, many transactions are more complex than just a simple sale and purchase. For example, there are tripartite contracts. There are contracts where, for example, supply is made by one person, receipt is by somebody else. There are situations where you have made a payment to the supplier, he's not paid, and he's not uploaded the returns on time, and you have taken credit, and then you're having to reverse, you're having show cause notices. Then there'll be certain services which you will describe in a particular way, but you've taken credit for something else. Rates will change because they will say that. So there are going to be a lot of issues with respect to how the input tax credit and this thing will
Badri,
work.
I've got your point. You've spoken about classification being a contentious issue. We are running out of time, Amit, and I want you to highlight what, in your opinion, are some of the areas vulnerable to litigation, and then I'll come to Rohan for the last question on overseas examples.
So clearly the whole world of places supply rules is something that I personally believe will become an area of protracted litigation going forward to perpetuity. It's bound to be, because you are trying to create a principle, and then business facts will obviously have to retrofit themselves in the principle. Sure. There will always be fact-based litigation around it. The other area, and which is what I'm actually now looking at more closely, is the whole world of cross-border. India has entered into a economic language which is known as the most popular language of fiscal conversations across the world. Is there going to be a double taxation avoidance agreement equivalent in indirect tax now?
That's an interesting thought. So that's something which I'm sure the government will chew upon. Rohan, we are completely running out of time. Last 30 seconds, if you want to quickly add any aspect which you have noticed in overseas jurisdictions which perhaps India can adapt.
Just one point on litigation. Till today, all litigation is assessee versus government. But if two states have a divergence,
that's going to
think of what that litigation is going to be. In terms of what we can take from abroad, I don't think chapter and verse. What I would really want is government to take the tax administration DNA to say we are a facilitator for GST, we will remain a facilitator. They have to be facilitators for the next 3 years.
Yeah.
If they turn tax collectors driven by revenue targets, we are going to have a tough time. So they must stay facilitators.
So the key word is the government officials need to act as facilitators and not as collectors, as is widely perceived. On that optimistic note, let me thank Rohan, Badri, as well as Amit for taking out time and joining me on this GST special of Amicus Curiae. On that note, we have completely run out of time, as I've already mentioned a few times earlier. This is Ashwin, Mohan signing off. See you next week.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/ETNow, and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at ETNowLive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/ETNow.